And tonight, my intention is to cover 3 parables. And the third one, the first 2 are leading up to the third one. So the third one will take more time on than the first 2. But they are important parables. Parables of the 2 sons, the parable of the tenants, and of the wedding feast. And of these first 2, everyone is more familiar with the parable of the tenants. But the parable of the 2 sons is important also. And as I said this morning, these 3 go together. And so we'll look at all 3 without getting into great detail, particularly on the first 2. And so we'll be in Matthew chapter 21, beginning in verse 28. And that's where we find the parable of the 2 sons. When we get to the wedding feast, we'll just follow this outline, and we'll go through the parable like that. And then as we go along, toward the end, we'll just develop some of the themes. As you know, one of the things that we've been doing is to remember the context. And this is a case where context is very important. Context is always important, isn't it? And when you're looking at the parables, you have to look at the context because, as I've said repeatedly now, when you look at the context of a parable, there will often, almost always, be an indication, here's what this is all about. And that's going to be the case here tonight also. By looking at the context, we can understand what these parables are all about. And so we're actually going to go back to chapter 21, verse 1, not to start going through all of these verses. But in chapter 21, we have the triumphal entry, don't we? Where Jesus enters into the city, and they immediately start to hail him, laud him, the Son of David, right? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. Now, the multitudes are there, right? It's estimated there's tens of thousands of people. And they're hailing Jesus as the Son of David, aren't they? But where are they at the end of the week? They're not there, are they? They're gone. Because they did not want the Jesus of the cross. They wanted the Messiah to come and establish his kingdom. And by the end of the week, this could not be the Messiah. The Messiah is not destined to suffer and die like this. So they rejected the one they hailed, as he entered the city. From there, Jesus cleanses the temple. After the triumphal entry, we know that he went into the temple, and they had turned the house of God, which he calls the house of prayer, into a house of merchandise, right? Buying and selling, selling pigeons and other things for sacrifice. And it had become like a farmer's market kind of scene. And he goes in and he's upset he's jealous over his father's house and the glory of the Father. And so he overturns the tables, etc. And this is a sign, isn't it, to the Jews, particularly the Jewish leaders, the elders, the scribes, and the Pharisees, that Jesus was rejecting their religiosity. He was rejecting them and what they were doing. So after the cleansing of the temple, he goes out, and it says in the morning, this is in verse 18, he's hungry. So he goes to a fig tree. How does he know it's a fig tree from a distance? Yeah, it looks like a fig tree, right? Outwardly, it's a fig tree. He's hungry. So he goes over to the fig tree, and the problem is there's no figs. Only leaves. Had the show, but no fruit to go along with what it should be. Just like Israel. They had the show, but no fruit that was appropriate, for being the people of God. And so he cursed the fig tree, and immediately it withered. Now this is kind of a forecast, isn't it? It's forecasting the rejection of Israel, that they are under the judgment of God. And as a people, not every individual, but as a people, they're being judged by God. And he is going to wither them on the vine, as it were, wither them on the tree. They're coming to an end. And this is what's coming. So then they challenge Jesus' authority. By what authority do you do these things? Most notably, the cleansing of the temple. What authority do you have to act like this? Who authorized this? We want to see the paperwork. We want to see your permit from the city. The code. Did they approve this? Jesus turns it around and, instead of answering their questions, he says, well, I'll ask you a question. The baptism of John, where did it come from? From heaven or from man? Now, he had him caught a little bit there. And it explains this. And so Jesus said, since you won't give an answer, or you say, we do not know, then Jesus said, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Now, at this point, he gives these three parables. And collectively, the three parables are all about Israel, their rejection of God and his Son, the Messiah, and judgment that is going to fall on them. That's what is pictured in the cursing of the fig tree. And it's kind of like, okay, let me give you some parables. Let me tell you in some stories what this is all about and where this is going. And so in verse 28, we have the parable of the two sons. Let me just real quickly read it. It's pretty short. So it begins with, what do you think? Which is like saying, okay, let me hear what you have to say about this. What do you think about this? A man had two sons. He went to the first and said, son, go out and work in the vineyard today. He answered, I will not. But afterward he changed his mind and went. He went to the other son and said to the same, and he said, I go, sir, but did not go. Well, which of the two did the will of his father? Now, they could really only give one answer. And so they said, well, the first. And the first said, I won't go. But he changed his mind and he went. So Jesus said, and truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and prostitutes believed him. And even when you saw it, you did not afterward change your minds and believe in him. So there were those who said, nope, not going. But they went. And those who said, we're going to go, but never did. Now, Israel is represented by those who said, we'll go, but never did. They made a show of it. They made a profession of it. They gave the right answer. Yes, sir, we're going. We're going to obey you. We're going to submit ourselves to you. But in the end, they didn't. But there were those who said, nope, We do not want to submit ourselves to God. We're rebellious against God. We're living in wickedness. But God changed them. And then they went. And they, the tax collectors and the prostitutes, those were the lowest people, right? Hated people in Israel. They said no and lived lives of rebellion against God over and over again. They said no to God. And yet, upon reflection, now we know where that would come from, but this is a parable. Upon reflection, they changed their mind and said, yes, we will go. We will submit ourselves to your authority. We will submit ourselves to your leadership. We will obey. Now, Jesus is telling this parable in the context of the rejection of Israel and judgment falling upon Israel. Those of you who said for years and years, for generations, yes, Lord, we'll do it, and never did. You never obeyed. And so God now has turned to people like tax collectors and prostitutes, the foolish things of life, the foolish things of earth. And they are brought into the kingdom. He says, John came and taught you. John told you, but you didn't believe him. But tax collectors and prostitutes believed him. Those who said no are now saying yes. And those who for years and years said yes are now saying no. Now, they're saying no to God. They're saying no to his son. So that's the parable of the two sons, just briefly, explained. This leads us into the very well-known parable of the tenants. And so, he's telling another parable. And remember that he's speaking to the religious leaders, the chief priests, the elders. And we even find out there were Pharisees there later on. So, he's speaking to the religious leaders of the Jews, right? So he gives them another parable, very well-known parable. Verse 33, and there was a master of a house who planted a vineyard. Now in this parable, who's the master of the house? God, because he sends his son, doesn't he? So God planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a tower and leased it to tenants who went into another country. Now the tenants are Jews, Israel of the Old Testament. When the season for fruit drew near, just like the fig tree, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. Now the servants here in this parable represent the Old Testament prophets. He even goes on to say that. So when the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit, and the tenants took his servants, beat one, killed another, stoned another. And again he sent other servants more than the first, and they did the same to them. And finally he sent his son to them, saying, surely they will respect my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance. Now that's a really stupid idea anyway, right? It's a parable, but he's making a point. You stupidly thought you could reject the son. You could kill him and somehow receive blessings and the inheritance. They took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. And when therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? Now he's asking them, what will the owner of the vineyard do when he comes back? So they said to him, he will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him fruits in their seasons. Now they don't even know what they're saying in this parable. It's a parable, but they don't understand what they're saying, do they? They don't know what they're actually saying here. So Jesus said to them, Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and this was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes? I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you. Now, he's being very clear here, isn't he? Parables were meant to reveal and conceal. And even sometimes when Jesus reveals truth, they still don't get it. But he's explaining to them, he says, to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. Now, by quoting from Psalm 118, 22 and 23, the stone that the builders rejected, Jesus is looking forward, isn't he? He is the cornerstone. He is the one who's being rejected. He is the one who will be killed. And the stone, will, when it falls on anyone, will crush him. So when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. They got it, right? They understood that what Jesus was talking about was them. Now, they didn't, have any spiritual depth or insight to perceive what Jesus was saying and make, spiritual applications. It didn't change them. It's just they understood that Jesus was talking about them. And although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds because they held him to be a prophet. So the parable of the two sons is like the parable of the tenants. The parable of the tenants takes it to another level, takes it another step. In the parable of the two sons, one son says, I will go, but doesn't. He's in the end rebellious. The other sons, made up of the lowest of the low, tax collectors and prostitutes who all their lives rejected God, have now become obedient, have repented of their sins, become obedient to do the will of God, and they enter the kingdom. The religious leaders who had rejected the Son, and they got it, they understood what Jesus was saying. Now that's a quick run through those two parables. And you know these parables well, you know what they're all about. And the parable of the tenants, God sent the prophets, to them over and over again. And he also sent Jesus. He also sent the apostles. Repeatedly, God sent messengers to them, but they rejected, didn't they? And so in the end, theirs will not be the kingdom of heaven. They will not be in the kingdom. And then we have the parable of the wedding feast, the final of the three parables. So let me just start here. I'll read and I'll make some comments. And the first thing that we see in verses 1 through 7 is the rejected invitation. This is just a general heading for these verses. The rejected invitation. 1 through 3 come from William Hendrickson in his commentary. I've added number 4. But anyway, the first 3 come from William Hendrickson. Verses 1 through 7, the rejection of the invitation. So again, Jesus spoke to them in parables. To who? Well, scribes, the Pharisees, the elders. He spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to, the kingdom of heaven may be likened to. He's talking about the kingdom of heaven, isn't he? The spiritual reign of God. God is the king. Now, he's king over everything. But the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, is his spiritual reign in the hearts and minds of his people, where he rules and reigns. The kingdom of heaven may be likened to, compared to a king. who gave a wedding feast for his son. Now, in this parable, most likely, who does the king represent? God. And he has a son. Who does the son represent? Jesus Christ, right? Now, the king gave a wedding feast for his son. Now, he's the king. You know, when Bev and I were married, I think the phrase is on a shoestring. You know, we just didn't have much money to spend. And so, the meals were brought in by people, in the church, and, it was just a very inexpensive wedding. But if you're the king, there's no budget, right? There's no budget for the king. It's going to be extravagant. It's going to, be a sumptuous feast with pomp and circumstance because he's the king. And it is a wedding feast for his son. Now, most of the time, in contemporary times, when you go to the wedding, the main figure, the main person is the bride, right? This is a parable, and it's a parable about a king and his son. And so the king is most concerned about his son. It is for his son. It is for the honor of his son. It's also for the honor of the king. I'm holding a feast. It better be a good one, right? His reputation is at stake, as it were. It's going to be grand. It's going to be great. It's going to be sumptuous. And it's for the son, so that all would honor the son. So he sent his servants to call those who were, past tense, invited to the wedding. Now, it was very common among Jews, but it was common, in those days for royalty even. They would send out a pre-announcement. There's going to be a wedding. You are invited to the wedding of my son. The king has invited you. Make ready. You be ready on that day. When everything is ready, you come. More details to follow. So many received an invitation. The wedding is coming up. Prepare to come. So he sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast. It's now time. And they go out and call all of those who received an invitation to come to the feast. There's some just interesting little details and, embedded in all of this, but we won't go into all of those things. So, they would not come. They refused. So he sent other servants, saying, "Well, tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My ox and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast." They received an invitation. It's now ready. The king has slaughtered the cow, the lamb, everything is ready. You just need to come and enjoy. Come and enjoy the feast, but they have said no. But they paid no attention and went off. Paid no attention. What does that suggest? They paid no attention. What? They ignored it. They were indifferent. They just dissed the king, didn't they? He is the king. How do you dismiss him? This whole thing is for the honor of his son. And you're saying no? One went to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully and killed them, just like the parable of the tenants, isn't it? So you can see there's overlap here of themes. He sent servants. He sent more servants. They rejected, abused, and ultimately killed some of them. The king was very angry. And that Greek word there means very angry. He was very upset. He was peeved. He was outraged. He flew into a rage. He was very angry. So he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Wow. Now, most believe that this is pointing forward to AD 70, when he would destroy their city. For what? For rejecting those that he sent, for murdering them, abusing them. It seems, outlandish until it's the king. And the king has prepared a feast for his son, that you might come and honor the son and honor the father. They don't care. Some are indifferent, and some turn to violence, just like in the Old Testament. Some were indifferent and ignored God, and some actually turned violent and killed those that he sent. So then, beginning in verse 8 through 10, we shift to the filled wedding hall. So he said to his servants, "The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy." They're not worthy of, the offer that was extended to them. Go, therefore, to the main roads. In the King James, if you grew up on the King James, go to the highways and byways. Go out to the highways and, follow those out to the byways. Just follow the road after road after road. Go to the main roads, plural, and invite to the wedding feast as many as you can find. Go and just give a broad invitation to everyone. Tell everyone they're welcome to come. Now we see a shift, don't we? From Israel being the special chosen people of God, who are now being judged by God because they rebelled and repelled and rejected him. And so now the gospel invitation goes out to everyone. The four corners of the earth, as it were. And invite as many as you can find. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. It doesn't matter. They went out with a broad invitation. Come, everyone, come all. Come to the feast. You're all invited. Some of them were what we might call good guys. Some of them were bad guys. But they all came. Kind of like tax collectors and prostitutes. People that the Jews looked down upon, turned their nose up to. So, the wedding hall was filled with guests. The banquet for the son, to honor the son. The invitation went out, and the whole banquet hall was now full of people who responded to the invitation to come and honor the son. That's really what it is, right? Come and honor the son. You've received an invitation, come. And they did. Beginning in verse 11, we have the missing robe. But when the king came in to look at the guests, and so we get the idea, the king comes into the banquet hall, he's strolling around, he's looking at all the guests that are there. You know, it's all about his son. They're all there. But he saw a man who had no wedding garment. Now, there's always the question here, well, where would he have gotten a wedding garment? You know, how did the rest of them get a wedding garment? Well, it's a parable. You know, not every detail is given. But it's implied that when they came to the banquet hall, they must have received some kind of garment, a wedding garment. Now, this is suggestive of the righteousness of Christ. You know, his robes for mine kind of an idea. And they received a robe to enter into the banquet hall. Remember, these are just people that are out there in the roads, right? Just people that they found. They weren't the high and mighty. They weren't the wealthy who rejected. These are just people, common people. They came to the banquet. And to make sure that the son is honored, that the father is honored, they receive a wedding gown to come into the banquet hall. That would be appropriate. You can't get into the hall without the garment. Just like you cannot get into the kingdom of heaven. You cannot get into heaven at all without wearing the robes of Christ, the righteousness of Christ. So here's this man who has no wedding garment, and he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?" And he was speechless. It was like jaw drop. There's nothing to say. He realizes there's nothing to say. There are no excuses, no justification, no rationalization. He was silent. How did you get in here without a wedding garment? Now, he got in somehow. We're not, this is a detail we don't have to overanalyze, but he got into the hall, didn't he? He got in among all of the people who were there with the garment. And there are those who even make it into the church who have never been clothed with the righteousness of Christ. He's sitting there, he's eating, he's enjoying the banquet. He knows he snuck in. He knows he's not looking like everybody else, but he's enjoying the benefits of the banquet, right? He heard the call, he saw it as a great thing, I'll just go. I don't want to submit to the requirement placed by the Father to get into the banquet of the Son. He must have said no thank you, or while others were getting it, he snuck through, but jumped ahead of the line, but somehow he got in. And he knows he doesn't have the garment, so when he's called out, there's nothing to say, he knows it. Just like on the day of judgment, when those who have made it into the church, but Lord, didn't we do this? Lord, didn't we do that? And he says, I'm sorry, but I never knew you. Depart from me, you worker of iniquity. And so, the king said to the attendants, here, Pastor Joe briefly touched upon, weddings in those days. Today we have our attendants, and they really don't do much. It's more representative. You stand up with, give testimony to the fact that you're in support of this. Attendants then had other jobs, other requirements. And one of the responsibilities of the groom's attendants would provide a little safety and security. You know, they looked over the whole thing. It was their job. And so he said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot, cast him into the outer darkness, the outer darkness. In that place there will be the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. And some translations have that definite article, the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. Now, what does that sound like? Yeah, the day of judgment, right? And they will be cast into hell, into outer darkness, wailing, gnashing of teeth. And so Jesus is speaking of the day of judgment when it will be made clear. You know, those who had the robes and those who didn't. And they will be separated. So, we have the missing robe. The man who snuck in without submitting to the requirements, without, he still was a bit rebellious, wanted the benefits of being in the banquet hall without meeting the requirements. Verse 14 begins with the word for. So Jesus is now what? He's offering a brief explanation. For. Now, many commentators and preachers on this text said, it would have been good if Jesus had just stopped with verse 13. And that's the end of the parable. That's the end of the whole thing. On that day, weeping and gnashing of teeth, day of judgment, he's going to make a great separation. There are some who make it into the kingdom, and there are those who've just snuck in. They've responded to the gospel invitation, though there's never been any change. End of story. But no, Jesus offers a brief explanation. For many are called, but few are chosen. The gospel call goes out. And today it goes out everywhere. Go ye into all the world. Go to the nations. Preach the gospel of Christ to everyone. Give everyone an invitation to come to Christ. And there are many who respond to the call. Now, why would anyone respond to the call who are not chosen? You probably have some ideas. Why would anyone respond to the general call? Okay, caught up in the emotions of the moment. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's some salve for their guilty conscience. What else?
When you mentioned benefits, you're talking about their man who put out robe.
Yeah, he wanted the benefits of the feast. Mm-hmm. Somebody want to expand on that? Some people hear the gospel call and they say, those are the kind of people I'm going to hang out with. Right? Those are good people. Look at the fun they have. Look at the joy they have. Look at the love they have. God has promised so many things. I want to be with them. Many are called to the gospel for the benefits of the gospel, for whatever reason. Even if it's social reasons, right, Paul?
And possibly because they're afraid of the alternative.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, some people say, double down. I'm covered. I don't like the alternative, so I guess I better join a church.
There's some self-righteousness about that too.
Mm-hmm.
I think they come and they don't truly repent. They don't really know about their sin and the significance of it. But with a man going to church, well, and some people go to network for business purposes.
Yeah.
And stuff like
Uh-huh.
that.
Yeah.
Sell you a house or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and the man who went in his just regular everyday clothing, it was a self-righteousness.
He didn't want to submit to the king.
Right.
This is what the king required.
I'll
and he
ge-
didn't want to do it.
Right. I'll get into my own,
Yeah.
enjoy the benefits without submitting to the king.
Free food.
Yep.
Well, honor of leadership, right? Those who like the attention and they're maybe a good
Mhm.
speaker or
Mhm.
whatever, and they think, oh, I like this.
Yeah, sure. Even in the New Testament churches, like Ephesus and Corinth, there were people who got into the churches and became leaders who weren't even Christians for selfish gain, filthy lucre's sake, whatever. You know, they wanted in on the party, but they didn't want in on the submission to the king. And so there are many are called. So how do you explain this? Well, it's because few are chosen. So he ends this by going to the sovereignty of God in salvation. There are those who are called. There are the elect. They will come. They will fill the banquet hall. But there will be some who just respond to the invitation. They're not chosen. And on that day, God will make a distinction, just like in some of the other parables, right? Like the parable of the tares or the weeds. And the final day, God will separate. You know, there's sheep and there's goats. God knows, you know, which are which, and he'll separate them. And on that day, there will be some who responded to the gospel invitation. They heard the call, but they never submitted themselves in obedience to the king. And they've dishonored the king and they've dishonored the son. You know, there's that day when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the honor and glory of the Father. When the Father is glorified, the Son is glorified. When the Son is honored and glorified, the Father is honored and glorified. The whole wedding feast is for the honor of the Son, but it glorifies the Father too, doesn't it? And there are those who for generations said yes, 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 but their hearts were hard and rebellious and would not submit to him. And so this third parable is keeping up with that whole idea of the rejection of some and the reception of others. Some are like the fig tree. There's no fruit. What do you do with the tree that's fruitless? You destroy it. It's done. Like two sons. One starts out by saying, no, no, no. They've lived their lives in rebellion, and yet the Lord saves them. Their hearts are changed, and they say yes. Those who said, yes, 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 all these years, their hearts are hardened toward the Lord. There is no obedience. There is no fruit. They will not enter the kingdom. It's like a wedding feast that's made to honor the king and his son. And those who have been invited for many centuries, over and over again, they were either indifferent or violent. And that's what the Jews did, right? They either ignored him, and some of them became violent and persecuted and killed the people that he sent, the prophets. And that's what's going on here. So it's just a continuation of this theme of the rejection of Israel and an extension of the gospel to the Gentiles, to everyone. All of you come. Anyone, just come. Hear the invitation, come. And God is opening the door to everyone to come to the feast. But not those who come in their own righteousness. They will be judged on that day. And they know he's talking about them. And he is. So, that's what these parables are teaching. It is rejection. Remember the judgment of God upon Israel. We studied the book of Ezekiel, right? The judgment of God on Israel. And that judgment falls. And even while John the Baptist and Jesus are preaching, it is in part judgment upon Israel. Because the Son is here. And yet they're going to reject him, aren't they? And it's going to come to a climax in the year 70 AD. When he destroys their city and their temple. Why? Judgment. And so it's judgment against Israel, but an opening of the gospel to all people. And that's the primary theme or thought behind these three parables. And I think it's pretty easy to see. I mean, if anybody asked you to explain the parable of the tenants, I mean, that's pretty much what you'd say, right? That, the landowner did everything, provided everything for them, a good country, a tower, fences, vineyard, everything. And when it came time for him to get something from them, they killed those that he sent. We know that that's Israel. All right, so we have a few minutes left. Any comments or questions? Any of your own observations tonight?